So I got an Arts Council research grant, but I had to have a subject matter to centre it around. And so that research was into night time, because I'd spent so much time awake at night on my own with sick children or whatever at odd hours when everybody else was asleep. So I started to do a bit of research into night and discovered it's a subject matter that has very little historically written about it, actually. It hasn't been talked about a great deal, because the things that go on in the middle of the night people think really are probably not of much consequence, and they don't talk about them in the daytime. So there's actually been little written down about it. So there are, but I did find some things that have recently been pulled together by a couple of writers about nighttime. But I have some pieces of writing that sort of started me off. We're going to read one of them. Let's just see. To begin with, the performance that I'm going to do tonight uses olive oil, and it's very simple, really. What we've done is we've asked people to give their thoughts on night, and they did it anonymously. So and they did it in a sealed envelope. So there was no worry that they could share whatever they liked. And I'm going to be writing some of what they've shared in oil on the paper. Many years ago, we've had various nighttime issues actually with children, but what really kicked this off partly was our son had meningitis when he was very young. He started to cry and he just wouldn't stop, and we took him to hospital and everything, and he had a rash, and it was very touch and go, and it was a really emotional time, and he was pretty sick, very sick, and my husband, he went off and rang a friend of ours who is a research neuroscientist, but was also a part-time vicar, strangely. He had a day release or whatever from Pfizer. And he came in, and they'd quietened the room down, and they'd lowered the lights in order to get Samuel stopped, the stress levels down. By the time they'd got the antibiotics, and then they had the lines going into his head all taped together and all the rest of it, and I was holding him. And our friend Dick came in, and he did something which is a very ancient sign of healing, and he poured olive oil on his head, and it dripped down and onto my arms, and I always remember that, actually, and because it is a symbol of healing. So that was something that I wanted to use here. So I did some research into night that I thought I would share with you. Various experiences. It's been sort of discovered recently that there were probably 2 stages of sleep. I don't know whether any of you are aware of that. So, particularly poor people would have gone to bed as soon as it was dark. Dark was quite frightening. You could get murdered in the dark. You could get things stolen. So a lot of the time they went to bed, they couldn't afford light and things like that. And they would sleep, but they would wake up again, and there would be a period of wakefulness, and then they would have their second sleep after that. And there are various things that indicate this, including Samuel Pepys' diary, where he mentions in the Great Fire of London that he had just finished his first sleep. So there are a lot of references to this. But if you just want to read this little section here, this is an experience of someone of this hour.
During the first days of autumn in 1878, Robert Louis Stevenson, at age 27, spent 12 days trudging through the...
Forget that.
place, France's southern highlands, despite having suffered from frail health during much of his youth. His sole companion was a donkey named Modestine. With Treasure Island and literary fame 5 years off, Stevenson's trek bore scant resemblance to the grand tours of young Victorian gentlemen. Midway through the journey, having scaled one of the highest ranges, he encamped at a small clearing shrouded by pine trees. Fortified for a night's hibernation by a supper of bread and sausage, chocolate, water, and brandy, he reclined within his sleeping sack with a cap over his eyes, just as the sun had run its course. But rather than resting until dawn, Stevenson awoke shortly past midnight. Only after lazily smoking a cigarette and enjoying an hour's contemplation did he fall back to sleep. There is one stirring hour, he later recorded in his journal, unknown to those who dwell in houses, when a wakeful influence goes abroad over the sleeping hemisphere, and all the outdoor world are on their feet. Men and beasts alike. Never before had Stevenson savoured a more perfect hour. Free, he delighted, from the Bastille of civilization. It seemed to me as if life had begun again afresh, and I knew no one in all the universe but the Almighty Maker.
So he goes on to talk about animals, that the area was full of animals, that they all woke up at that time and all moved about. And it goes on to talk about farmers and peasants and things, knowing full well that this was an hour of wakefulness for animals as well as human beings. And it says here, until the modern era, up to an hour or more of quiet wakefulness midway through the night interrupted most Western European people's night. Families would rise from their bed to urinate, smoke tobacco, and even visit close neighbours. So they would get up and go next door and have a quick chat, come back and start the second sleep of night. It says, in addition to suggesting that consolidated sleep, such as we today experience, is unnatural, segmented slumber afforded the unconscious an expanded avenue to the waking world that has remained closed for most of us since the industrial age. So that's something that's in the past now that we don't experience. But one of the things I've always wanted to do as an artist, because I live with woods behind my house, is go and have that meal of the brandy and the chocolate and the sausage and see just what happens in the woods at that time. And it was also interesting, actually, that beds, I think, came in around about the 1600s. But again, people's lives were so different. They would sleep. Everybody had their place. So they would start, I think, with the oldest girl near the wall, and the younger one, then the mother, and then the oldest boy, and back to the father. But then, because they all slept in the one bed, whoever was visiting, if the vicar came or a stranger was travelling past, that was their place then as well. So they would join, they would go to bed with you and they would stay the night, which is unthinkable nowadays that somebody who's just visiting would all get into bed together. So there's some really interesting facts about nighttime. And I don't know whether any of you are good sleepers or bad sleepers, or I have a couple of friends who have real trouble sleeping, spend a lot of time up at night. Yeah, and I think that dreams were really important to people in those ages. So when they would get up in that middle time of the night, there's a suggestion that their conversations would have been about the dreams that they'd had before that. So like they have maybe a special insight that you wouldn't have had in conversation in the daytime.
I think much more philosophical in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Very, very open. That's right.
Very open. Everything's sort of stripped away. It's hard not to be open in the middle of the night, actually. Whereas in the daytime, you can put on quite a facade, or everybody behaves in a socially acceptable way and stuff. But things are very stripped away at night. But I do remember as a young child sleeping very little, and often sitting on my bed, looking out of the window, or even opening the window, even in the winter time, and just spending hours looking out at the street and all quiet, totally awake. I'm just going to take some of the words of some of the things that people have shared and write them in this piece of artwork, and you can stay and have a look for as long as you want, and also you can have a look out in the street because you'll be able to see it out there.